Has anyone ever told you that you were the problem, just to avoid blame?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? For 5 years straight, my parents acted like my birthday simply did not exist. No call, no text, no quick card in the mail, nothing. At first, I tried to excuse it, telling myself that maybe they were busy, maybe something came up, or maybe they thought I was too old for birthdays to matter, but by the third year I understood it was not an accident. It had become a pattern, a choice, and by the fifth year it was so clear that I almost laughed when the day came and went in complete silence. Here is the part that really hit me. During those years I was not distant from them, not some estranged daughter they barely spoke to. I was the one who answered their calls at midnight when the internet went out, the one who quietly paid the overdue fee on their homeowners association bill so they would not get another warning letter. The one who added their streaming subscription to my account because it was easier than hearing them complain about how expensive everything had become. I kept the family phone plan under my name because they said it helped with the family discount, and every month I paid my share on time while covering late payments that they said they would pay back but never did. I told myself I was being helpful, that it was easier than fighting about a few $100s, but really I was being used. So imagine this. 1 week after that fifth ignored birthday, I walked into their driveway to see my younger sister Kayla standing beside a shiny new car, bow on top, tears in her eyes, while Mom filmed the whole moment like it was a commercial. They said it was a family surprise, everyone cheering, everyone clapping, and Mom looked at me and said, almost joking, "Well, you are always too busy for birthdays, so we thought we would put the celebration money to better use." And I just stood there, silent, because I felt like I had been slapped, but also like I had finally been handed proof of what I already knew. I was never going to be treated equally. On the drive home, something shifted. It was not explosive anger, not screaming, not even crying. It was just this deep exhaustion that felt heavier than anything else. I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave or covered, I would always be the afterthought. They were not going to wake up one day and suddenly treat me differently. I was the responsible one, which in their language meant the one who did not get gifts, who did not get recognition, but who absolutely got the bills and the guilt trips. That night I sat down and for the first time in years, I pulled my full credit report. I had this nagging thought that would not leave me alone, and sure enough, there it was, a fresh inquiry from a car dealership tied to my name. I knew instantly what had happened. They had used my income or my profile to help qualify for Kayla's car loan because she had a spotty job history and their credit was stretched. My stomach dropped, but it also clarified everything. It was not just about ignoring me, it was about exploiting me. I started making a list right there at the kitchen table. Family phone plan, I removed my card. Streaming service, canceled. HI account, closed my access. I found the spare house key in my drawer, slid it into an envelope with a 2-sentence note, "I am taking a break. Please remove me from any accounts with my name," and dropped it in the mail the next morning. It felt small but sharp, like the first cut of a rope that had been strangling me for years. I told myself I was done with being the quiet helper, done with being the invisible daughter who made sure everyone else looked stable. If they wanted to treat me like I was nothing on my birthday, then they could also live without my money, my credit, and my constant reliability. It was not dramatic, it was not loud, but it was mine. That night, instead of my mom calling to ask why her streaming login stopped working, my phone buzzed with a notification I never expected, a voicemail from my boss, saying, "Hey, can you come by tomorrow? We need to talk about something strange that came through HR." And here is where the story really began to twist, because my mom did not call me that night, she called my boss. When I walked into HR the next morning after that voicemail, I half expected a lecture about professionalism or some vague talk about work-life balance, yet what I got instead was Paula, calm as a lake and sharp as a needle, who pressed play on a voicemail where my mother's voice poured out in that syrupy tone she saves for church people and customer service, saying that I was not well, that I was acting erratic, that the family was worried and someone at my company should step in before I did. Something dramatic, And while the words were soft, the message was not, because she was asking my employer to manage me the way she had always wanted to, with pressure and escalation, and other people enlisted to keep me in line. Paula paused the recording and watched my face, and for the first time in this whole mess, I did not apologize or explain or try to smooth it over, because I realized that if I did that here, in the one place where my work actually speaks for itself, I would be handing them the same power that had been draining me for years. I took a breath and explained that my family had ignored my birthday 5 years in a row, that the week after the 5th one they bought my sister a new car using my details without permission, that I had found a fresh dealership inquiry on my credit report, and that I had mailed back the key and cut off the accounts I paid for, and as I said it all out loud, the whole pattern sounded like a case study rather than a family quirk, because it had structure, a timeline, and a clear benefit to them, with a clear cost to me. Paula nodded, thanked me for being direct, and told me that company policy protects employees from third-party interference, that my family cannot leverage my employer to pressure me, and that any further contact of that kind would be documented, logged, and, if necessary, blocked entirely. And in that moment I felt a strange kind of relief, because someone in authority finally said, in clean words, that a line existed and could be defended. While I was still in her office, my phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Deb, the one relative who never performs for an audience, asking me to call when I had a minute, and since I was already choosing honesty over smoothing, I stepped into a conference room and called her, braced for pity or warnings about family ties, and instead she said, as if she had been holding it in for years, that Grandpa had left education money for both of us, that mine had somehow been used during a rough year for Dad's business, and that Kayla's portion had been reallocated more than once with promises to refill it later, promises that got lost in the shuffle of emergencies and celebrations. And then she lowered her voice and said she had seen paperwork where my income was written as household on a couple of applications because, quote, I was the stable one, and that was what families did when a lender needed to see reliability. I stood there with the phone pressed to my ear and felt that mix of nausea and clarity that tells you a secret did not just fall out of the sky, it was carried carefully for years, and I thanked Deb, asked her to hold on to any documents she had, and told her I was done playing the role I was assigned. When I went back to Paula's office, I asked for something very specific, a brief paragraph summarizing the policy that forbids third-party interference in employment matters, nothing dramatic, just clean language I could quote in a boundary message. She printed it, slid it to me without fuss, and told me to send whatever I needed to send and to copy her if I felt safer doing so, and I realized I had an ally who understood the difference between gossip and documentation. At my desk, I wrote the calmest email I have ever written, and it was so boringly factual that it might as well have been a receipt, which was exactly the point. I listed the monthly amounts I had covered for the family phone plan, the streaming service, the late HOA fees, and the interest I ate on a small credit card balance that ballooned the year Dad's business dipped. Then I confirmed that I had removed my payment methods from shared accounts and returned the house key, and I stated in one clear sentence that contacting my employer was a violation of boundaries and would not be tolerated, and then I pasted the company policy paragraph right under it so there would be no room for performance or selective memory. And finally, I asked them to confirm in writing that my name, income, or credit would not be used on any application or renewal going forward. I copied Aunt Deb so that there was at least one adult in the loop who would not pretend confusion later. I did not send that email in anger, and I did not dress it up with emotion, because I wanted the record to look like a ledger rather than a diary, and once it was gone I put my phone in a drawer and tried to do a normal day of work. The kind where you drink coffee that has cooled too much and answer emails that did not need to be meetings, and for a few hours I let myself believe that a clear boundary might actually take, that maybe they would be embarrassed enough by the HR policy to back off. And that optimism lasted until I got home and found a certified letter sticking out from my mailbox like a bad joke with a tracking number. Inside the envelope was a document that looked official until you actually read it, a multi-line calculation typed up by my father that assigned dollar amounts to food, utilities, rides to school, and even a broken arm when I was a kid. A running total topped with a neat bolded line labeled amount due, and the message, although dressed in fake bookkeeping, was simple and ugly, because he was telling me that if I was going to put numbers on my help, then he would put numbers on my childhood. Which is a move so petty it should not surprise me, and yet still managed to steal my breath for a second. Not because I believed I owed anything, but because it showed me how far they were willing to go to keep the ledger in their favor. I set the paper down, poured water I did not want, and felt the heat rise not into rage but into resolve, because if they wanted to turn love into invoices, then we were going to look at real paperwork, not Dad's homemade theater. And that meant credit union records, dealership forms, and a proper freeze on anything that had ever touched my name. As I picked up my keys, my phone lit with Kayla's name, yet I let it go to voicemail, because the next conversation I was going to have would be with a man whose job was to verify signatures and ownership, not with a sister who had never been told no. And before the sun went down, I had an appointment set for the morning with the credit union officer, a folder ready for printouts, and a plan forming that felt less like a fight and more like cleaning a wound, because once you start fleshing the mess out, the pain finally has somewhere to go, and that is when you learn what heals and what does not. The next morning, I walked into the credit union with a copy of the ridiculous invoice my father had mailed me, and while part of me wanted to tear it up and throw it in the trash, another part of me knew it had value. Not because it proved I owed him anything, but because it gave me a timeline, a date, and a string of numbers that I could cross-check against actual records. I asked to speak with Mr. Alvarez, the officer who had helped me set up my first savings account years earlier, and when he sat across from me, steady and professional, I laid out what had happened: the ignored birthdays, the sudden appearance of a shiny new car for my sister, the dealership inquiry on my credit report, the certified letter with childhood expenses listed like debts, and the gnawing suspicion that my name had been used more than once to hold up applications I had never signed. Mr. Alvarez listened without interrupting, only nodding when I explained that I was not accusing anyone without proof, that all I wanted was a clean record and protection against further misuse. He pulled up the files connected to my account and, within minutes, found what I dreaded and expected at the same time. There was a pre-qualification application tied to a dealership just 2 months earlier, where my income was listed as part of the household, though the signature line was left blank for me because I had never been asked to sign it. He said it was not illegal for a family member to list household income as long as the lender accepted it, but he also noted, firmly, that my name had no business being used without my knowledge, especially if it created inquiries on my credit. I felt a wave of anger, not the kind that makes you shout, but the kind that hardens every muscle in your body, because I understood then that this was never about a forgotten birthday or a careless oversight. It was about access. About keeping me tethered to their stability so they could gamble on big gestures for my sister while leaving me invisible. I asked Mr. Alvarez to help me file a fraud alert and a full credit freeze, which would prevent any new accounts or loans from being opened without direct verification from me, and he guided me through the forms patiently, even pointing out that I could request copies of any documents where my name appeared in the past 5 years. I signed everything, slid the paperwork back, and when I walked out of that office I felt lighter, as if I had just locked a door that had been swinging open for anyone who wanted to use it. On the way home, I stopped at the dealership itself and asked to speak with a manager. I told them, calmly but firmly, that I had discovered my information had been tied to a pre-qualification I had never consented to. At first the man tried to brush it off, saying families often do this, but when I told him I had already filed a fraud alert and would be submitting a police report if necessary, his tone changed. He promised to flag the application, remove my information, and send me a written statement confirming that I was not a guarantor or cosigner. I did not raise my voice, I did not plead, and I did not give them any room to argue. I just made it clear that the days of using me quietly in the background were over. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and drafted a short, sharp message to my parents. I told them the credit freeze was in place, that any account using my information would be reported, and that they were no longer allowed to include my name or income on anything, whether financial or otherwise. I added that this was their official notice, and I copied Aunt Deb because I wanted one person in the family to know I had taken action. I did not use anger, I did not insult them, and I did not leave open questions. I made it sound like a notice you would get from a lawyer or a bank, precise and undeniable. The silence that followed was brief, because the next morning, before I even had coffee, my phone lit up with my sister's name. I let it ring twice, considered ignoring it, but answered anyway, and immediately heard her sobbing. She told me she had been pulled over on her way to work because the insurance had lapsed, that when she called the company they told her the policy had changed after my details were removed, and that the payment had jumped beyond what she could handle. She said it was my fault, that if I had just kept quiet and let things stay the way they were, none of this would have happened. I listened without interrupting, and when she finally asked me what I was going to do to fix it, I told her calmly that I was not going to do anything. I told her she was an adult, that she had a car, and that she had to manage it herself, and the silence on the other end of the line was long enough for me to imagine her mouth hanging open in disbelief. For years she had been cushioned, protected, and rewarded, while I had been treated as the reliable background character. Now she was being told, for the first time, that the cushion was gone. When I hung up, I knew this was not the end of the fallout, because people like my parents and my sister do not take responsibility easily. They scramble, they deflect, they attack, and I braced myself for the storm that would come. But I also knew that I had taken the one step they could not undo. I had locked the doors, frozen the accounts, and reclaimed my name. That night, I expected another letter or maybe even a visit, but instead it was Aunt Deb who called, her voice steady, saying she had overheard something at a family brunch that I needed to know. Mom had laughed while telling someone that ignoring my birthdays was their way of resetting me, of teaching me not to be dramatic about attention, and while the words were framed as a joke, the cruelty underneath was as sharp as glass. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and realized this was no longer about money or even favoritism. It was about a deliberate choice to erase me, to cut me out symbolically while still using me practically. And if they thought they could laugh about it in public, then it was time for me to bring receipts into the same light where they had mocked me. And as I closed my laptop that night, with the dealership statement arriving in my inbox and the fraud alert confirmed, I knew exactly what I would do next. I would put together a packet, neat and undeniable, that would dismantle their story before they could spin it again. But for now, the phone sat quiet, my credit was safe, and my sister's tears were her own to manage, not mine. By the time the weekend rolled around, I had already started assembling the packet I knew I would eventually need, a clean collection of documents that would strip away any excuse or performance my parents might try to stage. I printed copies of the bills I had covered, each one with a date and amount, not to wave in anyone's face, but to have as undeniable proof. I saved the email from HR that confirmed my mother had left a voicemail at my workplace. I tucked in the dealership's written acknowledgement that I was not a guarantor and that my information had been used without my consent. I even stapled together screenshots of my credit freeze confirmations. Piece by piece, it began to look less like a pile of family drama and more like a case file, the kind a lawyer could walk into court with if it ever came to that. As I sat at the table with the printer humming beside me, my phone lit up with a message from Aunt Deb. She said she had recorded something I needed to hear and that she was not sure whether sending it was the right move, but she could not ignore it. I opened the audio clip, pressed play, and within seconds I was listening to my mother at a family brunch, laughing while she told a group of relatives that ignoring my birthdays had been a conscious choice. She said it was their way of resetting me, of teaching me that I was not supposed to expect attention, and then she added, between sips of coffee and laughter, that it was funny to watch me wait for something that never came. The laughter of others at the table joined hers, muffled but unmistakable, and the cruelty of it hit harder than the years of silence ever had, because now I knew it was not neglect, not forgetfulness, but an active decision they mocked together. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling the familiar sting in my chest, but instead of letting it collapse me, it solidified my resolve. This was not just about private humiliation anymore. This was about a story they were telling to others, a narrative where I was cast as dramatic, ungrateful, or simply irrelevant. And if they wanted to make me invisible in words, I would make myself unignorable in facts. I added the audio clip to the packet and wrote a one-sentence note at the top. This is the truth. The following Monday, I sent that packet to every relative who had ever been pulled into the gossip web. I did not add commentary, I did not attack anyone, and I did not even demand a response. All I wrote was, just correcting the record so no one drags my employer into this again. It was calm, almost bureaucratic in tone, which was deliberate, because I wanted them to see that I was not unhinged, not bitter, just factual. Within an hour, my inbox filled with stunned replies. Some relatives apologized for believing half-truths, some tried to stay neutral, and a few remained silent, which told me more than any words could have. Predictably, my parents did not stay silent for long. That evening, my sister called again, her voice sharp instead of tearful this time. She said I had embarrassed the family, that Mom was furious, that Dad was livid, and that by sending those documents I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I told her, calmly, that the only line I had crossed was the one they drew when they used my name for their loans, ignored my birthdays with intention, and tried to sabotage my job. She sputtered something about loyalty, about family sticking together, and I reminded her that family loyalty does not mean indentured servitude. Then I hung up before she could throw more of their words at me. But the escalation did not stop with phone calls. The very next day, there was a knock at my apartment door, and when I opened it, my father was standing there holding another printed sheet of paper. This one was even bolder than the first, a so-called bill for my childhood, listing expenses from diapers to dental visits, ending with a bold total and the phrase, amount owed for upbringing. He said I needed to take responsibility for everything they had done for me, that by refusing to contribute I was acting ungrateful, and that I was humiliating them in front of the family. I let him speak, and then I looked him straight in the eye and said I had already taken more responsibility than they ever acknowledged. I told him I had the receipts for the bills I paid, the records of the accounts I covered, and the written confirmation from institutions proving I had been used without my knowledge. I said, you can print all the bills you want, but none of them change the fact that you used me until I said no. His face went red, his voice rose, and for a moment I thought he might try to push his way inside. Instead, he threw the paper onto the floor and stormed off, muttering about how ungrateful children always turn against their parents. I picked up the paper, folded it neatly, and added it to the packet. To me, it was just more evidence, more proof of how far they were willing to go. But what struck me most was that their anger was no longer private, it was spilling into my doorway, into my life outside of family gatherings. They were not ashamed to bring the fight to my home, and that meant I had to be prepared for whatever would come next. That night, as I sat with the growing file of documents and memories that no longer felt like isolated events, but a clear pattern, I realized the stakes had changed. This was not only about boundaries, or finances, or even birthdays anymore. It was about my name, my stability, my right to live without interference or manipulation. And if they thought a printed bill and a loud confrontation would intimidate me back into silence, they were about to learn that I had built something far stronger than their guilt trips. The storm had shifted from whispers and mockery to direct confrontation, and as I looked at the stack of papers on my desk, I understood that the next move had to be final, airtight, and undeniable. I was done defending myself against false invoices and whispered jokes. The next step would not just shut down their narrative, it would close the book entirely. Because after years of silence, I finally had all the proof I needed, and I was ready to show them what it looked like when the invisible daughter stopped playing her part. When my father stormed away from my door after thrusting that absurd printed invoice at me, I knew the final confrontation was approaching, and I also knew that if I wanted it to be the last one, it had to be handled in a way that left no room for spin. No gap for them to twist, and no loose ends that could be used to drag me back into the role they had always assigned me. For days I thought about how to do it, replaying years of conversations in my head, remembering every instance where I had been the one to quietly solve the problem while they laughed at me behind my back, and realizing that the only way to end it was not through shouting or demands for apologies, but through documentation and a symbolic act that would close the loop they had tried to keep open forever. I arranged to meet my father at a neutral place, a coffee shop where the tables were too close together for anyone to raise their voice without attracting attention, and when he sat down across from me, puffed up with self-righteous anger, but also clearly rattled by how calm I looked, I slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single-page ledger I had typed myself, listing every payment I had covered over the years, the monthly share of the family phone plan, the streaming service fees, the homeowners association fines, the times I had driven them to appointments that cost me time away from work, and even the interest I paid on a credit card balance that grew because of their emergencies. At the bottom, in bold, I had written total paid with a number that far exceeded the petty calculations in his childish invoice, and beneath that I had typed 2 words, paid in full. He scanned the page, his jaw tightening as he realized that I had not only kept track, but had the nerve to present it to him like a bank statement. Before he could launch into his performance about parental sacrifice, I handed him another paper. A letter from Mr. Alvarez at the credit union confirming that my name had been cleared of any responsibility for the dealership pre-qualification, and another from the dealership itself acknowledging that I had never consented to be listed as household income. The combination of those documents with my credit freeze meant that any door they had once slipped through using my identity was now permanently locked, and I could see the recognition of that settle in his eyes like a weight he did not want to carry. I told him, calmly but firmly, that I was not going to argue about gratitude or loyalty anymore, because gratitude is something given freely, not extorted with fake bills, and loyalty is a two-way street, not a one-way drain. I said that from this point forward, I was done being their financial safety net, their silent guarantor, or their invisible daughter. I told him I would not be attending family gatherings where I was mocked as entertainment, and I would not be taking late-night calls to fix their problems. I explained that this was not punishment but liberation, and that they could hate me for it if they wanted, but they could never undo it. When he tried to pivot to the old story about Grandpa's money and family sacrifices, I cut him off by pulling out the final document, a copy of Grandpa's letter that Aunt Deb had given me, clearly stating that the education fund was meant to be split equally between both granddaughters. The silence that followed was the kind that exposes guilt better than any accusation, because in that moment he understood that not only had they taken something that was mine, they had built a whole narrative of duty and gratitude on top of it. I told him, without raising my voice, that families who steal opportunity from one child to overindulge another do not get to lecture about loyalty. But the most important part of that meeting came last. I handed him a small card from the community center downtown, showing a photo of the old family piano, polished and standing proudly in its new home, with a plaque on the side that read, "In memory of George Miller, who believed in education for both his granddaughters." That piano had been dangled over my head for years, always promised as one day yours, always used as a reminder that I owed them gratitude. Donating it in Grandpa's name was not revenge for revenge's sake. It was a way of reclaiming something they had weaponized and turning it into a legacy that actually honored him. My father's face twisted with rage when he realized what I had done, but I simply said, now it belongs to the community, just like his gift was meant to belong to both of us. I stood up, left the folder and the papers on the table, and walked out before he could start yelling. For the first time, I did not look back to see his reaction, because it no longer mattered. I had delivered the final move, and nothing he said afterward could change the fact that I had won. That night, the family group chat exploded with angry messages, accusations, and attempts to paint me as cruel or heartless, but I did not reply to any of them. Instead, I sent a single message to Aunt Deb: I am done. If there is ever an emergency, you can reach me. Otherwise, let them yell into the void. She responded with one sentence, proud of you. And that was all I needed. I spent the evening alone, not with cake or candles, not with any grand celebration, but with silence that belonged to me. For the first time in years, I did not feel like the forgotten daughter waiting for recognition, or the responsible one carrying everyone else's weight. I felt like myself, whole and free, with no invoices left unpaid and no doors left unlocked for anyone to slip through. And as I closed my eyes that night, I knew the book was finally closed. They could explode all they wanted, but the truth had been laid out in black and white, the legacy had been reclaimed, and the invisible daughter they thought they could erase had written the last chapter herself.